Wish TV is focused on family and the community and is committed to sharing the stories of those who are making a difference every day. From the All Indiana Podcast Network and Wish TV, this is Behind the Eight Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Eight. I'm your host, Cody Adams. We have a fun one today. Faran Fronczak, the newest member of the Wish TV team. Thanks for being here, Faran. This is awesome.
I know. It's like a cool studio, and it's just really cool. Thank you.
The All Indiana Podcast Network that we do this on. And this room, which I'm going to describe to listeners because they have no idea, because they've never seen in here, is plated in gold.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, and there's a wonderful butler who stands over in the corner offering mints, and he is so nice.
I'm sitting on a red velvet throne that says Queen.
Yeah, and if you want anything, ask Gerard. He gets drinks for everyone. So, Faran, you're probably catching her in the mornings. Because Hannah Mordeau, who we love dearly, is out on maternity leave, and you graciously accepted the opportunity to hang out there in the mornings with Scott and Jeremy and that crew, and just lend a little bit of help, because it's hard, especially in the mornings when someone isn't there. Like, people don't understand what that can do to the morale of a group when you're doing a lot more work without someone there. And we'll get into all of that, but we want to learn about Faran first and foremost, where you're from, all that fun jazz.
So I'm from Chicago, born and raised. Grew up in the western suburbs. I'm one of 6 kids. A lot of people, Chicago is very into culture and heritage. You know, you got all these different neighborhoods that are still kind of separated by what people's nationalities are. So a lot of times people, in Chicago, we always say, what are you? And for me, I'm Polish, Italian, Irish, and Russian. And I'm just a straight Chicago mutt. Yeah. But I will never forget first coming to Indiana when I went to Purdue. And I asked, it was my boyfriend at the time, I was like, oh, what are you? And he's like, what am I? I'm an American, And I was just like, oh, okay. So that's how, just being in Chicago, that's how we always identified ourselves. Which again is very weird compared to the rest of the country, but no. And then went to Purdue. I had 2 dreams growing up. I either wanted to be the weekend update anchor on SNL, or be a news anchor and a journalist. And comedy, when you start, doesn't pay that well. Right. And also, though, I also just liked being a part of the community and telling people things that I know and things I found out. I was always that kind of kid, Mom, guess what I found out today? She'd be like, oh God. And so I just liked journalism a lot more. I still did, some stand-up comedy stuff. I did stuff at Second City and whatnot. But, I just found that I loved the news more. I was always a theater kid,
So much so that, you've done just, the gamut is insane, the amount of work that you've done in all the places you've been, and reporting on some of the biggest stories in the world, not just, locally or anything of that nature. What has that journey been like for you? Being willing to do, whether it be something covering the president or, a national crisis or an international crisis, all the way down to something as simple as, a bake sale in your early days of doing stuff. Because there is such a wide range of things that you're covering when in your career.
And it's so funny, too, because anytime I have conversations with people, your family is always going to shoot it to you straight, especially my Chicago family. And, one of the things is we can talk about whatever, and I'll be like, oh yeah, there was this one time I did this. And then, oh yeah, I know about this. And they're always just like, you don't know everything, And I'm always like, you have no idea the things that I've seen. I mean, I started as a, young buck reporter in Rockford, Illinois, covering the price of corn. Yeah. And covering, he's now out of Congress, but Adam Kinzinger's first campaign, and then all of a sudden it's 10 years later, I'm in D.C. and I'm walking the halls of Congress, and I see him, and he's like, I know you, I remember you, and so it's just weird, but it's every story, you learn something, you just kind of keep it in your head, and then, you also kind of learn that every story kind of really is important too in its own special way. So whether it is the price of corn or January 6th, live for 8 hours on the West Lawn, every story has something that has an effect on me.
I think that's one of my favorite things about this job in general, journalism, is the idea that every story, you mentioned it, matters very, very much to at least one person, right? Yes. And that's why we do it, because we know that it matters. We know that even though, the community of Rockford may care about the price of corn and, Des Moines may not or whatever, it doesn't matter because that's who we're serving. And you have come into Indianapolis very quickly and shown that you are here for the people of Central Indiana and the surrounding areas and the entire state, because we're the statewide news network. But it takes some special ability and genuine care to do that. Mm-hmm. Has that always been the case, or was that something you had to work at? You know,
in the very beginning, and it was one of those things. I always was a theater kid. When I was 9, I was in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat with Donny Osmond.
Nice.
And, growing up, I'm not a Bears fan, but I am a Walter Payton fan. And he had this great quote where he always said, like, I'm always going to go out and bust my hump and play the best game, because this is for that dad up in the nosebleeds who spent, his paycheck to bring his son, to the game to watch me play.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that I always remembered in theater. And then going off and doing stories, like, that was the one thing that it always just kind of stuck with me. Like, no matter if nobody cares about the price of corn, like you said, somebody does care about it, and I want to do this story right for that person,
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the things in the beginning, after you get past the whole, like, camera and the makeup and getting shots and trying to get the right interview and stuff like that. After you get past all that, that's when I really started to care even more about my stories, because it was just learning everything, know, because you truly do on this job. You learn on the job when you first start out as a young kid and as a journalist, know. But every story, I don't know. And maybe it's just because I like to fight for the underdog, or like, always people say, like, I'm an empath, but I do. I mean, just because I do care, and I've always been that type of kid where I put my heart and soul into everything,
I don't want to dive too much into it, but you and I come from similar backgrounds as well. We've worked at similar stops across the way and things of that nature. But one of the things that I think is interesting, people don't see that, right? They just see you today in Indianapolis and they go, right. Oh, Faran's the new anchor here at Wish TV. But some of those ups and downs through a career can have a crazy good impact. Have you noticed that at any point across your career where you thought, boy, I don't know if I'm going to get out of this? Like, this may be the end. I may want to be done here. And then realizing, no, there's something beyond that is better, and I still have a purpose in that.
I mean, there are days where, like they always say, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. There are days where this is a job, sure. And you're like, oh my gosh, oh my God, when is this day over?
Yeah.
And you will have those slumps, but I think for the most part, it really is the stories that you cover, the people you get to meet, being in the community, that really make it worthwhile. And that was the one thing that I did notice when I was working in D.C. and I was at a national and international network, is that, I wasn't really out in the community that much, because it was basically, you come in, what stories you're going to do. It's very national, your Congress, Senate, Supreme Court, whatever. And you're seeing things on a much broader scale where, yes, it's more people impacted, but you're not getting to meet, like, that one person that it really impacts, whereas that's where a lot of people will ask, like, well, why did you come back to local news? And it's like, because I just felt like I was going in, I was a talking head, and then I just went home.
Yeah.
And it
can get very surface level, right?
Yes.
In some of that aspect, it can be very surface level.
Yeah. And that is where I did see where I was like, I really miss local, because and I really saw it really big time was in South Bend when I was the anchor for Fox there. And I just missed it. And that's, so when you talk about, like, is this the end? Like, that's where I was like, okay, my dream was to get to DC, always covered politics, stuff like that. And then it was like, sometimes the dream isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah.
So.
You and I have done this, I'm not going to say how long, but we've done it a long time. and so it's always fun to me when new people and younger, puppies start in this career and they have all these grandiose ideas and what it's going to be. And there is some of that, obviously. Like, there are top level jobs that are just insane, but there's something so unique about doing a story, walking out on the sidewalk and running into that person that says, oh my gosh, thank you so much for covering that, because we've been dealing with this forever, or whatever that situation may be. And you don't get that everywhere, right? Like,
no.
And that's what makes, to me, and you I would assume agree, but like, Indianapolis is such a fun market in that way, because you get that big city feel, but also you're impacting people on a very personal level here locally. And I think that's where you have already come in and made a name for yourself, or made an impact, I guess, is that that genuine care comes across on air. And part of that is we've been talking really deep, but part of that is because you are a genuinely fun human being. And,
I try to be.
And the way you speak on air is the way you speak off air with a few less curse words.
Yeah, that is the one thing. I guess that's some insight is, I do have a Chicago sailor's mouth sometimes.
Yeah. That's okay.
But I've never sworn on air. I've never sworn on air. And swearing is a sign of intelligence, they say.
Yeah, how about that?
But yeah, no, it's one of those things where, when you're going through journalism school and, just listening to it, you know the reporter voice that they teach you. And, today, the suspect fled away on foot. And, and I always said to myself, I was like, I'm not doing that because I would just, having a big sense of humor, I would just always laugh at myself. And B, I always used to tell people, I'm like, you don't go through the McDonald's drive-thru and be like, I'll have a cheeseburger, a double fry, and a Diet Coke. Like, you don't talk like that, And so when you say it's nice to hear where you say genuine, because it is me, and if you meet me out in the street, definitely say hi, but you're gonna get who I am on air too.
What's it like? And I've been on that shift, so I already know the answer to this. But what's it like working with someone like Scott Sander, who obviously is insanely talented, and has been in this community for so long?
So Scott has really been how do I say this? Well, one, I found out that we're both Scorpios.
Yeah?
We're both November babies.
Okay.
But two, my two mentors when I was in D.C. were Rick Sanchez, formerly of CNN, and Larry King.
Yeah.
And I thought that they were the two nerdiest guys when it came to journalism. And then I met Scott Sander.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think it was my second week, and we just started nerding it out of just how writing stories and different words to use and, tenses and just, we just had literally a half an hour conversation. And then our producer gets in our ear and they're like, well, you guys were made for each other in this industry, and it was one of these things where he just so cares about just every word that comes out of his mouth. He's like, I own it. And, that's the other thing is he has said to me, and it's not an act. He has said, people look to us for their information and they feel like they can trust us. And if I go out there and I say something that's not true, I'm going to think about it the rest of the day. And that's why he is so meticulous when it comes to scripting and attribution and all those journalistic-y things. And so it's been so much fun to nerd it out with him. And like I said, I mean, this is stuff that, imagine two doctors talking about, surgery techniques, that's how we are. And that very old school Walter Cronkite style thinking of, balancing. And then we'll watch national packages as they're airing and we'll talk about, they should have used this word or they should have had this, we just nerd it out every morning.
We joke around a little bit here, but it is true. We call him a journalist with a capital J. He's just to the T, everything matters. And it doesn't even matter the story. It could be something about, the great pasta push. And he's like, that word isn't correct because it doesn't start at 4 p.m. It starts at 4 a.m. or whatever. And everybody else may glaze over it and be like, okay, well, who cares? And Scott's like, no, I care. And legitimately care.
Oh, yeah.
So, You mentioned being a part of Second City. You have a lot of talents and past careers or things that people may not be aware of. You're a dancer. Mm-hmm. You danced for the Purdue Boilermakers.
I did.
So there are a lot of people here who like that and a lot of people who hate that because we're divided here across the state. But you also danced for the Chicago Bulls.
I did.
What was that like? What years were you there? Do you want to say what years you were there?
Oh, yeah, no. Okay. It was 2011, 2012, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so that would have been...
It was Derek Rose's second and third year.
So you would have had Joakim Noah on those squads.
Mm-hmm.
And
Luol Deng, Kirk Heinrich, Brad Miller.
Oh, we love Brad
Purdue.
Miller. He was a pacer. He was one of our favorite pacers. We loved Brad Miller here in Indianapolis. What was that like? Because that atmosphere... I mean, Derek Rose, not to get way too deep into sports, but peak Derrick Rose, MVP level Derrick Rose was something we had never seen in sports. And dancing during those timeouts, during halftime, whatever, that must have been electric in that venue.
Oh yeah, well, and the thing is that I was there for his second year when he started to become made of glass, as they said. But one of the things that's really interesting about it is so there's about like 5,000 girls that try out because, it's the city of Chicago, and they only take 25.
Wow.
And, you have to know how to turn, leap, jump, split, all that stuff. And I was trained in, I started in ballet, and I was a big-time ballerina. And then they always say ballerinas make the best hip-hop dancers because we're so placed in everything for ballet, and then you get to hip-hop, and we can just throw it around, and I had a lot of really cool people that I studied under. One of them was Wade Robson, who was the choreographer for NSYNC and Britney Spears. So I knew all those dances from him and whatnot. But, 5,000 girls try out. The first day, over half of them, they get weeded out because a lot of times it's girls who think that they can do all this. And then they were like, oh, I can't.
Yeah.
But then you have training camp where it's 3 days where it is just intense dancing for like 6 hours straight, and you're up against all these different girls, and the thing that's interesting is that, while they do take the best of the best that they get that year, but they also have to look at the number of blondes, brunettes, redheads, black girls, Chinese girls. It's like, it's equal opportunity dancing, which was the craziest thing to me. And then we had, I remember helping my youngest brother learn football plays when he was in high school and quizzing him. We had those same kind of things. It was just, every time out, you didn't know what song they were going to put on, but we knew 15 different dances that all had their own formations, and every game changed because you had to try out for every single one of your set games.
Oh, wow.
The thing is, though, is that when you're trying out for your routine, for that game, I'm not competing against everybody else. I was competing against every other blonde.
Oh,
because there were 5 squads of 5, and it was like, it was nuts. And it got to be where I was like, am I like a football player or am I a dancer? It's nuts. And I had to remember, and that was
it's like a full-time job.
It was, and you got paid nothing.
Yeah,
but,
sure, yeah.
But the opportunity was great. And then not only did these routines have their own formations, your formation changed every game because it was based on height, and I was always one of the taller girls. And so one game I'd be in the back right corner, and then the next time I'd be in the back left corner, and you have different ways you have to move around each other, like from a triangle to a circle to square. I mean, it was just nuts.
Yeah.
And so and by the end of the season, because then you got weighed in. A lot of people don't talk about that. We got weighed in, and I started dropping a lot of weight because I was dancing every game.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but it was a great experience, and it did teach me, you're always replaceable. And if you're not towing the line, you can be replaced. And so that's kind of what's always helped me feel like just being hungry too, and literally hungry.
That, I'm sure after all that dancing, it's interesting to me too because Purdue. Well, I know that there have been journalists that come from Purdue. It's not necessarily known for its journalism.
It is not, no.
Degree. So how did you end up A, at Purdue, and B, go, I think guys should just do their journalism school here at an ag school?
Yeah, it's so funny because now they have their journalism programs getting better, but...
listen, I went to Indiana State, so I'm not like, it's not like I'm from Ball State or Arizona State or Mizzou or like these great journalism schools, but I'm always curious how people end up in that avenue and in that career at a school that isn't known for it.
And it's so funny. I really kind of looked at it like, okay, well, what's a major for being on TV? And then, it was either communications or journalism, because like I said, just at that time in high school, I was just so focused on, because I was in dance, track, theater. I was involved in everything. Small Catholic high school. And I saw Purdue. I loved the campus. I really wanted to actually go to Iowa. I looked at SMU. Never looked at Mizzou. I thought about Texas maybe, but then a friend of mine, our moms were best friends in high school, and his older sister was a cheerleader at Vanderbilt, and his mom ended up getting cancer, and his sister was flying in all the time from Nashville to Chicago. And I remember saying that, and I was like, I don't want to be that far away from my parents if anything were to happen. And once I went to Purdue and I saw their dance team and I saw everything that the school was about, I was like, I'm going to go here. And then they had just come off the Rose Bowl win with Drew Brees. So I was like, okay, and this way too, Big Ten Network was getting launched. And I was like, this will be perfect because my parents will be able to see me on TV dancing. Purdue was terrible at football and basketball basically the entire time I was there. So it was like I went to this great school and they never even really saw me, But I loved it though. It was a blast, and it does have a really great name. Like whenever people would say like, "Oh, Purdue, isn't that like an Ivy League school?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, for sure."
Oh, definitely.
I went to an Ivy League school for sure.
That's so funny.
But so yeah.
You mentioned I want to talk Second City a little bit because if anyone knows anything about comedy or loves SNL, they know that that's where a lot of those people come from. What was that experience like? Was it difficult? Was it fun? Was it challenging? Was it not what you thought it was going to be? What was that like?
So, one of the things that people don't know is when you are a co-anchor with somebody, and I had my very first co-anchor, Steve Duvall, shout out to you. He also was started as a comic too.
Okay.
And one of the things that he told me, I was a very young anchor. I was like 24. I was like one of the youngest ones in Indiana at that time in South Bend. And he was like, you need to study me. You need to know how, like when I'm going to be done with sentences, you need to know like if I'm tossing to you, you need to be able to just know my mannerisms. And he's like, because I'm studying you. And I remember thinking like, that is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Like, why would I study you? And when it brought me back to learning improv comedy, and you have to know the people that you're with and know their mannerisms and just having that look. They always say like, husband and wife, they can just look at each other. Yeah. You have to do that with your co-anchor. You have to do that with your improv, castmates. And so that was the one thing that I really took from comedy, especially doing improv, was that and learning people, studying people, because I when they told me that I was going to the morning show first, I studied Scott and Jeremy.
Yeah.
And so like when I got in there, Scott even was like, you can tell when I'm done. And I'm like, dude, I've been studying you for 3 weeks like a psycho, Yeah. but that's what you have to do.
Especially on that shift, because you're working with two very different people.
Yes.
In the way that they are on air, and their delivery and their read rates and all that stuff. And I know that's like a lot of jargon that listeners may not care about, but that is stuff that does make a difference when you're watching at home, that it doesn't end up feeling awkward.
Right.
Because if Jeremy may take a little bit longer to read something and you're jumping on the end of his sentence, as opposed to Scott may be a little bit quicker and you're waiting too long in that pause after, and now there's an awkward pause. Like all those things happen and people don't realize it, but we realize it in the moment.
Exactly.
I think that's, to talk about myself for a second, I think that's why people sometimes don't always enjoy working with me, because I don't even know what I'm going to do a lot of the times.
Oh, I'm the same way.
So yeah, so I think that can be very frustrating, but I think it's also what makes like those lifestyle shows fun. So.
But that's the one thing though, is that you are able to pivot into anything, and that is the one thing about you as well, that you and I share this commonality, is that you can improv, because there are some journalists, and you can see them immediately when things go haywire. Your live shot bombs out. The prompter. There are times where the prompter just won't roll, or the prompter goes out, and you can't read the box anymore. And you have to be able to pivot. And I have had literally every kind of situation happen, and I'm sure you have too.
Yeah.
And you just have to be able to pivot. And sometimes for people, that versatility is really, really tough.
Yeah.
And so that was the other thing that I kind of learned with improv too, is you just got to be able to just yes and. That's the big thing you always hear.
Yep. Yes and.
Yeah,
that's a huge one. I've done improv over the years too, and it's always that, and it does help, and not just in like what we do, but in everyday life. Mm-hmm. It's very quickly easy to say no, because that's I'm out of my comfort zone. I don't want to do that. No thanks. But if you say yes and, like, sometimes you're pretty surprised at like what the next thing is after the and.
Right.
And it can end up being a lot of fun sometimes. Sometimes it sucks. Like there are times where I shouldn't have yes and there. That was a bad move. Right. But overall, I think it's a good thing. Before we get done here, because we've talked a lot about the business and your career, Faran as a person outside of these walls, what is Faran doing?
Oh, wow. So I have a dog and 2 cats. I'm like a huge animal lover.
Okay.
And actually, it was my dog Buddy.
All animals or just yours? Because there are people who say they're animal lovers.
I'm all animals.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Like there was a story this morning about the animal shelter, and just the conditions being terrible. And I'm like, I literally want to go adopt all those animals and take them home. If I could. But so I've had Buddy since he was about a month old. I got him when I was an anchor in El Paso. Had him trained to be a therapy dog. And so I will, and he sits with kids in the hospital, so I'll either be there. I got him a sister, Holly, her little kitten, Buddy Holly.
Yeah, that's clever.
And she came with a brother. in the box. And I was like, oh, I didn't get this one, though. I just wanted her. And they're like, oh, well, this is her brother. And I was like, okay. And I was like, but I can't have two. And they're like, well, if we bring him back, we have to euthanize him.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was like, oh, so you're making me play
Guess
the role
I'll be
of God.
taking him.
Yeah. And so his name is Freddie, after Freddie Mercury, my favorite singer of all time.
Queen is my favorite band of all time.
Same here. Yep. I grew up with Queen, Beatles,
Same.
Aerosmith. I let the lead out every once in a while with Led Zeppelin. Yeah. And then my mom was like Sound of Music, Broadway.
That's so funny.
So yeah, very versatile. But no, yeah. So I walking Buddy around. I am a huge political junkie. I started in sports. A lot of people don't know that. I started in sports. I was a Notre Dame sideline reporter for a bit.
How about that?
And then switched into politics because it just so happened that they needed a reporter on that story covering something that Mayor Pete Buttigieg did.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of stuck. Politics is just like sports, just no balls, pucks, or nets.
Well, it's so funny. A lot of people do that. They go, I started out in sports, then moved to politics, then to news and now to lifestyle. But like, it's a very easy transition because you have to be able to, once again, pivot, and you have to be able to think on your feet. And what I thought was happening is no longer the story in the last minute of what's going on. And news sometimes doesn't happen that way. News sometimes can be a little more rigid all day long at times. So
yeah.
Anyway, that's really interesting.
And so that was the thing is then I really got into politics. To the point where especially after living in DC too, so it's like I'll watch like old presidential debates for fun, but it's just exciting because you know why I love it is because not a lot's changed.
Sure.
I mean, the things that Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush and Ross Perot were debating, that's one of my favorite debates to watch.
Yeah.
A lot of the same stuff that we're debating about today, and it's just, I love history, love music, love sports too. But yeah, I would say, since I'm still kind of new here, even though I know Indiana, I'm still trying to kind of figure out, where I want to volunteer and all that stuff. Cause I do truly love being in the community, but, and if it's not that, at least right now with the morning show, I am sleeping.
Yeah, I get that too.
It feels like you're always tired or you're always trying to play catch up.
That will change at some point. Obviously, we don't know like all the details of that, and I'm not going to divulge all that here. But you will be in the evenings at some point. That's the plan, at least. So people will be able to. They may miss you on the mornings, but they'll be able to see you in the evenings at some point. So, and again, Hannah, if you're listening, we love you and we miss you, and we hope that the baby's doing wonderful.
Oh, Graham, he's getting a big little boy too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Cooper was kind of a big little boy too. Gracie is smaller, but those boys.
Something in the water at Hannah's house.
Something about it. Well, you can check out Faran Fronczak currently every morning on Daybreak along with Jeremy and Scott and learn more about it over on our website, wishtv.com. Faran, thank you so much for hanging out with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
We'll make it happen again sometime. There's a lot more that we can talk about. This was only 30 minutes. I bet we can go like 2 or 3 more hours probably.
I know, right?
All right. Catch us another episode on Behind the Eight. And if you want to see any of the others, listen to any others, go to the All Indiana Podcast Network on wishtv.com as well. Take care.
From the All Indiana Podcast Network, this is Behind the Eight Podcast. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And connect for even more on Facebook and at wishtv.com.